He was a Hollywood star. He had dinner with his wife at a small Italian restaurant. He walked back in to grab his gun. Miles, ghost hunter here. When Robert Blake returned to the car, Bonnie Lee Bakley was already gone, and half of America has an opinion about what happened in those missing minutes. Studio City, Los Angeles, May 4th, 2001. 9:30 in the evening. A warm spring night, the kind where the sidewalks still hold the heat of the afternoon, and the air smells like eucalyptus and exhaust. On Tuhunga Avenue, a small Italian restaurant called Vitello's is doing its usual Friday business. Families at the booths, couples at the small tables, a few regulars at the bar. The kind of neighborhood place where the waiters remember your name and the calamari comes out crispy. Robert Blake eats there twice a week, sometimes more. Tonight he is there with his wife, Bonnie Lee Bakley, 44 years old, small, blonde, sharp-eyed. She has been married to Blake for 6 months. They have a daughter together, a baby girl named Rose Lenore, born the year before. Bonnie is not from Hollywood. She is from Morristown, New Jersey. She came to California the long way, through a life that included 10 previous marriages, a trail of small-time fraud convictions, and a business that involves sending suggestive photographs to lonely men in exchange for money through the mail. Blake and Bonnie finish their meal around 9:30. They pay the check. They walk out together. The car is parked about a block and a half away, on a residential side street called Woodbridge. A quiet street, houses with lawns, nothing unusual about it. Blake likes to park away from the restaurant. He says it is a habit. He says he likes the walk. They reach the car, a 1991 Dodge Stealth Black. Bonnie gets into the passenger seat. Blake walks around to the driver's side. He opens the door. He pauses. And then he does something that becomes the single most disputed moment in this entire case. He tells his wife he forgot his gun in the restaurant. He turns around. He walks back. 1.5 blocks. He enters Vitello's. The staff sees him. The owner, Steve Restivo, sees him. Blake goes back to the booth where they had been sitting. He retrieves a revolver, a small handgun, which he had allegedly placed on the bench seat under his thigh during dinner and forgotten. He puts it away. He talks to the owner for a moment. He leaves. He walks back to the car. According to Blake, this round trip takes about 5 minutes. Some estimates, based on the restaurant staff's recollections and the phone records, put it closer to 15, possibly 20. No one knows for sure. There is no camera on Tujunga Avenue that captures the full walk. No witness sees him for the entire duration. When Robert Blake returns to the Dodge Stealth on Woodbridge Avenue, he sees something that changes his life and ends hers. Bonnie is slumped in the passenger seat, a single wound to the head, a second wound to the shoulder. She is still breathing, barely. Blake runs, not to the car, to the nearest house. He pounds on the door of a man named Sean Stanek, a local filmmaker. Stanek answers. Blake is screaming. Stanek calls 911. The call is logged at 9:46 in the evening. Paramedics arrive within minutes. Bonnie Lee Bakley is rushed to Providence St. Joseph Medical Center in Burbank. She is pronounced deceased on arrival. That is the official story. That is what Robert Blake tells the police when they arrive. That is what he will repeat, word for word, for the next 4 years, through thousands of hours of interviews, interrogations, depositions, and ultimately, a criminal trial that will rivet the country. But here is what Miles Ghost Hunter wants you to understand from the very beginning. Every piece of this story, every single element, has a second version, a contradiction, a shadow. The story Blake tells is not the story the prosecution will tell. The story the prosecution tells is not the story the defense will tell. And the story that a civil jury will eventually accept is different from the story a criminal jury will accept, even though both are looking at the same facts. This is a case about a missing minute, about what happened on a quiet residential street in Studio City between the moment Robert Blake walked back into Vitello's and the moment he pounded on Sean Stanek's door. That window, somewhere between 5 and 20 minutes long, is where the truth of this case lives, and that window has no witnesses. Before we can understand what happened that night, you need to understand who Bonnie Lee Bakley was. Because every investigation starts with the victim, and every verdict hinges on how that victim is seen. Bonnie was born on June 7, 1956, in Morristown, New Jersey. A small industrial town, working class, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and leaving means making a choice about what you want your life to look like. Bonnie decided early that she wanted something bigger. She was a small girl, not even 5 feet tall, blonde, pretty in a sharp, alert way. She had a plan. She wanted to marry a celebrity. This was not a secret. She told her family. She told her friends. She kept scrapbooks of movie stars. She wrote letters to Frankie Valli, Dean Martin, Jerry Lee Lewis. She was, by her own admission, obsessed with the idea of fame by association. And she was clever. Very clever. By the time she was in her 20s, Bonnie had built a small mail-order business that operated on the fringes of the law. She would place personal advertisements in Lonely Hearts magazines, in the backs of adult publications, in small newspapers. The ads promised attention, companionship, photographs. Men from all over the country, mostly lonely older men, would write to her. She would write back. She would send photographs. She would ask for money. She would cash the checks. She would send another letter. She would ask for more money. This was not a legal business. It was a long-running fraud. Over the years, Bonnie was arrested and convicted multiple times for various financial crimes, bad checks, wire fraud. In 1989, she was arrested in Arkansas. In the 1990s, she served brief jail terms. She had, in a very real and documented way, made a career out of manipulating lonely men for money. She was also married. A lot. The exact number is disputed. Some sources say 9, some say 10, some say more, if you count the informal or fraudulent ones. Bonnie used marriage the way some people use credit cards, as a tool, as a way to access things. Some of the marriages were to men she met through her mail-order schemes. Some were to men she met in person. Some lasted weeks. Some lasted less than that. By the late 1990s, Bonnie had 2 main goals. She wanted to marry a real celebrity, and she wanted to have a child with one. She pursued this goal with the same focus and energy she had put into her fraud business. She approached multiple well-known men. She sent letters. She made phone calls. She showed up in places. In 1999, she began a brief relationship with Christian Brando, the son of Marlon Brando. When Bonnie became pregnant in the early months of 2000, she initially told Christian the child was his. She also, at the same time, told Robert Blake the child was his. Robert Blake was 66 years old. Christian Brando was 41. Both men were, at various points during the pregnancy, told by Bonnie that they were the father. The child was born on June 2, 2000, a girl. Bonnie named her Rose. DNA testing later confirmed the biological father was Robert Blake. And here is where Bonnie Lee Bakley's life collided with the Hollywood establishment in a way she had always dreamed of and could never have predicted. Robert Blake was not just an actor. He was a piece of American film history. Born Michael James Vigencio Gubitosi in Nutley, New Jersey, in 1933, he started his career as a child performer in the Our Gang comedies in the 1930s and 40s. He appeared in over 100 films and television shows as a child. He transitioned into adult roles in the 1950s and 60s. In 1967, he played Perry Smith in the film adaptation of Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, a performance that is still studied in acting classes today. In the 1970s, he starred in the television detective series Baretta, for which he won an Emmy Award in 1975. He was, for decades, one of the most respected character actors in Hollywood. By the time he met Bonnie, Blake was in his mid-60s. He had been married before to the actress Sandra Kerr, with whom he had 2 children. He lived in a modest house in Studio City. He had money, but not Hollywood money. He had reputation, but not A-list reputation. He was the kind of actor who worked steadily, was known for being difficult on set, and was respected by other actors without being chased by paparazzi. When Bonnie became pregnant and the DNA results confirmed Blake was the father, Blake was faced with a choice. He could acknowledge the child and support her financially, which was his legal obligation. Or he could marry Bonnie, which was not required but was something she aggressively pushed for. According to Blake, and according to everyone around him at the time, he married Bonnie only because of the baby. On November 19, 2000, Robert Blake and Bonnie Lee Bakley were married in a small ceremony. The marriage was not, by any account from any source, a love match. Blake later told investigators, told jurors, told anyone who would listen, that he married her to give his daughter legitimacy, that he did not love Bonnie, that he found her manipulative, untrustworthy, and frankly, dangerous. He also told people, in the months leading up to May 4, 2001, that he was afraid of her. He told friends she was blackmailing him. He told associates she was threatening to take the baby. He told people she was stealing from him. And, according to 2 Hollywood stuntmen who would later become central witnesses for the prosecution, he told them something else. Let us talk about the first day of the investigation, because what happens in the first 24 hours of a homicide investigation sets the course for everything that follows. May 4th, 2001, 9:46 in the evening. The 911 call from Sean Stanic's house. Paramedics and police arrive within 5 minutes. The Los Angeles Police Department, specifically the North Hollywood Homicide Division, takes over the scene. The physical evidence at the scene is sparse. There is the car, a black Dodge Stealth, with Bonnie Lee Bakley in the passenger seat. There is the wound pattern, which indicates she was shot at very close range through the driver's side window, which was open, or possibly through the open passenger side. The ballistics experts would later disagree. There is no murder weapon at the scene. There are no immediate witnesses. The side street, Woodbridge Avenue, is quiet. Some residents report hearing what might have been 2 loud pops, but no one comes outside. No one sees anyone running. No one sees a car speeding away. The police canvass the area. They interview the restaurant staff. They establish that Blake and Bonnie were at Vitello's from approximately 7:30 to 9:30. They confirm that Blake went back into the restaurant after the meal and retrieved something from the booth. They confirm that he walked back to the car alone. They interview Blake on the scene. He is, by every description, shaken. He is crying. He is cooperating. He tells them the story he will tell 1,000 times. He went back for the gun. He came back to the car. She was already gone. He ran to the nearest house. And here is the first oddity. The first thing that investigators focus on. The gun that Blake went back to retrieve. Blake voluntarily hands over this weapon to police. It is a 9mm handgun, a legal weapon, one that Blake has owned for years and is registered to him. He says he carried it that night because Bonnie had received threats, because there had been strange phone calls, because he was worried about her safety. But the weapon that killed Bonnie Lee Bakley is not Blake's registered 9mm. The weapon that killed her is a Walther P38, a German service pistol from the Second World War, an older weapon, a heavier weapon, a weapon that fires a different caliber of ammunition than the one Blake was carrying. And this weapon is not found at the scene. The police search the area around the car. They search the neighborhood. They search the alleys. And in a dumpster behind the restaurant, less than a block from where Bonnie was found, they discover it. A Walther P38. Still warm, recently fired, wiped clean, no fingerprints, no serial number that could be traced to any current owner. The weapon was, ballistically, a perfect match to the bullets recovered from Bonnie's body. and from the car. This is the single most important piece of physical evidence in the entire case. And it is also, for the prosecution, the single most frustrating piece of evidence. Because the gun is untraceable. There are no prints, there is no DNA, there is no receipt, no registration, no history that connects it to Robert Blake. The weapon appears, from a purely forensic standpoint, to have been purchased through private channels, possibly decades earlier, and to have existed in that dumpster in a kind of legal vacuum. No one can prove Blake ever owned it. No one can prove he ever touched it. No one can prove he ever even saw it before that night. The weapon is a ghost. The autopsy is performed the following morning. The medical examiner determines the cause was 2 gunshot wounds, one to the head, one to the shoulder, fired at close range. Consistent with the shooter standing at the driver's side window and reaching across, or possibly standing at the passenger window. Time of death is consistent with the 911 call. There are no defensive wounds. Bonnie did not fight. She was, by all indications, taken by surprise. The lead detective on the case is a veteran LAPD investigator named Ron Ito. Ito is a homicide professional with decades of experience. He has seen every kind of domestic case, every kind of staged scene, every kind of celebrity complication. Ito looks at the evidence on the first night, and he forms a working theory. It is the same working theory that about 90% of homicide detectives in Los Angeles would form, given these facts. The husband is the primary suspect, not because of bias, not because of celebrity, but because of statistics, because of opportunity, because of the missing minute. But having a theory is not the same as having a case. For the next 11 months, the LAPD works this investigation with extraordinary intensity. They interview everyone Bonnie ever knew. They track down her 10 ex-husbands. They investigate her mail-order business and the lonely men who had sent her money over the years. They look for anyone who had a motive, anyone who had been defrauded, anyone who had threatened her. There are dozens of leads. Bonnie had made a lot of enemies. There are men in the Midwest who had sent her hundreds of dollars and received nothing in return. There are men who had traveled to meet her and been rejected or robbed. There are ex-boyfriends. There are business associates she had cheated. And then there are the people closest to Blake himself, the people who spent time with him in the months before the killing, the people who listened to what he said about Bonnie in private. This is where the investigation takes its most dramatic turn, because 2 men come forward, 2 Hollywood stuntmen. Men who had worked with Blake over the years, one of them going back decades. Men who had drunk with him, traveled with him, and, they claim, been approached by him with a very specific request. The first is Ronald Hambleton, known in the industry as Duffy Hambleton. Duffy is a long-time Hollywood stuntman, in his 50s, with a long career of doubling for leading men in action films. He has a reputation as tough, reliable, and sometimes unpredictable. He has a history of substance abuse and has been in and out of recovery programs for years. The second is Gary McClarty, another veteran stuntman, also in his 50s, also with a long career. McClarty has doubled for some of the biggest names in Hollywood over the years, including Steve McQueen. He also has a history of substance abuse, specifically methamphetamine use, which he has been open about. Both men tell a remarkably similar story to LAPD investigators. Both claim that in the months before Bonnie's death, Robert Blake approached them separately and tried to hire them to make Bonnie go away. Duffy Hambleton tells investigators that Blake approached him in early 2001. According to Duffy, Blake described Bonnie in harsh terms. Blake allegedly said Bonnie was ruining his life, that she had trapped him, that she was a fraud and a threat to his daughter. And then, according to Duffy, Blake offered him money, a specific sum, to handle the problem. Duffy says he refused. He says he was horrified. He says he never took it seriously enough to report it, partly because he did not believe Blake was truly serious, and partly because reporting it would have meant the end of their professional relationship and potentially trouble for Duffy himself given his own history. Gary McClarty tells a similar story. He says Blake approached him separately, also in early 2001. He says Blake used similar language about Bonnie. He says Blake offered him money. He says he also refused. He also did not report it at the time. But after Bonnie was killed, after the news reached them, both men came forward, separately, with stories that matched in the key details. Both claimed Blake had tried to hire them for the same thing, roughly at the same time, in the months before the killing. For the LAPD, this is the breakthrough. 2 independent witnesses, 2 matching accounts, a pattern of premeditation, combined with the statistical likelihood, the missing minute, the geography of the shooting, the detective's instinct that a husband walking back to get a forgotten gun on a quiet side street when his wife is sitting alone and vulnerable is too convenient, too arranged. On April 18, 2002, almost a year after Bonnie's death, Robert Blake is arrested at his home in Studio City. He is charged with 1 count of murder with special circumstances, solicitation of murder based on the stuntmen's testimony, and conspiracy. The special circumstances charge, lying in wait, means that if convicted, Blake could face the death penalty. Prosecutors later announced they will not seek it, but the charge itself carries life without parole. Blake is held without bail. He is 68 years old. He is placed in protective custody due to his age and his celebrity. He will spend the next 11 months in the Los Angeles County jail system, while his legal team prepares his defense. And now, we need to talk about his legal team, because this is a case where the quality of the defense will matter enormously. Blake's first attorney is a high-profile Los Angeles lawyer named Harland Braun. Braun is known for celebrity defense work. He represents Blake publicly for the first several months. He gives press conferences. He attacks the prosecution's case in the media. He is aggressive, camera-friendly, and experienced. But Braun and Blake have a falling out. The details are disputed, but it becomes clear that Blake wants a different kind of defense, something quieter, something focused on the courtroom rather than the press. In 2003, Blake replaces Braun with a new lead attorney. His name is M. Gerald Schwartzbach. Schwartzbach is not a celebrity lawyer. He is not a media figure. He is a Northern California defense attorney based in the Bay Area, known among his colleagues as one of the most thorough and methodical trial lawyers in the state. He does not give press conferences. He does not comment to reporters on the courthouse steps. He focuses on the evidence. He focuses on the cross-examination. He focuses on dismantling the prosecution's case piece by piece. Schwartzbach takes on Blake's case in 2003. He spends the better part of 2 years preparing. And what he prepares for is simple. He is going to attack the 2 stuntmen. He is going to attack the physical evidence. He is going to attack the prosecution's timeline. And he is going to do it without theatrics, without celebrity drama, with the patient surgical precision of a man who has tried dozens of murder cases. The trial is scheduled to begin in December 2004. It is delayed into 2005. Jury selection takes weeks. The trial itself will run from December 2004 through March 2005. 4 months. One of the longest celebrity trials in Los Angeles history at that point. The prosecutor assigned to the case is Shelley Samuels. Samuels is a career deputy district attorney with extensive trial experience. She has tried many serious cases. She is known for being tough, prepared, and persuasive with juries. She believes in this case. She believes Robert Blake killed his wife. She believes the stuntmen. She believes the physical evidence, combined with the stuntmen, combined with the missing minute, combined with the overwhelming motive, adds up to a conviction. The trial opens with Samuels laying out the prosecution's theory in her opening statement. Her theory is clean. Blake married Bonnie only because of the baby. Blake hated Bonnie. Blake tried to hire stuntmen to get rid of Bonnie. When the stuntmen refused, Blake did it himself. The night of May 4th, 2001, was planned. The walk back to the restaurant for the gun was a cover. Blake either fired the shots himself during that missing minute, or, more likely, had someone else do it while he was in the restaurant establishing his alibi. The Walther P38 was untraceable because Blake had acquired it specifically for this purpose and disposed of it immediately after. That is the prosecution's case. It is a case built on circumstantial evidence, witness testimony, and the statistical and common-sense inference that a husband with overwhelming motive, opportunity, and a documented pattern of trying to arrange his wife's death is the most logical suspect. Schwarzbach's opening statement is different. It is short, it is calm, and it makes a single, devastating point. Not a single piece of physical evidence connects Robert Blake to the murder weapon, to the killing, or to anyone who might have been hired to carry it out. The two stuntmen, Schwarzbach tells the jury, are not reliable witnesses. They have substance abuse histories. They have changed their stories multiple times. They have financial motivations for cooperating with the prosecution. And their stories, upon close examination, do not hold together. Schwarzbach does not promise the jury a great dramatic reveal. He does not claim to know who really killed Bonnie. He simply tells the jury that the prosecution cannot prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that his client did it. And that is all the defense needs. Let me pause here, because I want to make sure we understand what the burden of proof actually means in an American criminal trial. The prosecution does not have to prove who did kill Bonnie Lee Bakley. They do not have to prove a motive. They do not have to produce the murder weapon with Blake's fingerprints on it. They have to prove to 12 jurors, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Robert Blake is the person who killed her or caused her to be killed. Beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the standard. It is the highest standard in American law, and it exists for a reason. The entire premise of the American criminal justice system is that it is better for 10 guilty people to go free than for one innocent person to be convicted. That is the principle. In practice, in celebrity cases, in cases with circumstantial evidence, in cases where the physical evidence is thin, this standard becomes enormously difficult to meet. And Schwarzbach knows it, and Samuels knows it. And from the first day of testimony, the battle is fought on this ground. The prosecution calls the stuntmen early. Duffy Hambleton takes the stand. He tells his story. Blake approached him. Blake offered him money. Blake described Bonnie in hateful terms. On cross-examination, Schwarzbach goes to work. He does not attack Duffy with hostility. He does not shout. He asks questions, patient questions, precise questions. Questions about Duffy's history of substance abuse, about the specific substances he had been using in the period when he claims Blake approached him, about the medications he was currently taking, about the statements he had previously given to police, to the media, to investigators, and how those statements had changed over time. And the changes are there. Schwarzbach has them documented. In one early statement, Duffy described the conversation with Blake one way. In a later statement, with different details. In a third statement, with different dates. The core story stays the same, but the details shift. Locations change. Dialogue changes. Specifics blur. Schwarzbach then moves to Duffy's arrangements with the prosecution. Has he received any benefits for his testimony? Has he been given consideration on any pending legal matters? Has he been paid for any interviews? Has he sought a book deal? The questions plant doubt. They do not prove Duffy is lying. They simply show the jury that Duffy has reasons to shape his testimony a certain way and that his memory is not reliable. Gary McLarty takes the stand, and McLarty's testimony is even more problematic for the prosecution because McLarty has a documented history of methamphetamine-induced psychosis. He has, at various points, reported being chased by helicopters that were not there. He has reported hallucinations. He has been hospitalized for substance-related psychiatric episodes. Schwarzbach brings out all of this on cross-examination. Gently. respectfully, but thoroughly. He establishes that McLarty's perception of reality during the period he claims to have had these conversations with Blake was itself compromised, that McLarty cannot reliably distinguish between things that happened and things he believed were happening, that his testimony, while he may genuinely believe it, cannot be taken at face value. By the time both stuntmen have been through cross-examination, the prosecution's strongest evidence is severely damaged. The jury has seen two men with histories of drug abuse, with inconsistent statements, with potentially unreliable perceptions of reality. Are they lying? Are they mistaken? Are they partly right and partly wrong? The jury cannot be certain, and uncertainty in a criminal trial favors the defense. Then comes the physical evidence, or rather, the lack of it. Samuels brings in ballistics experts to discuss the Walther P38. She brings in the medical examiner to discuss the wound pattern. She brings in crime scene investigators to discuss the scene. All of this testimony is solid, professional, accurate, but none of it connects to Robert Blake, because there is nothing to connect. No prints, no DNA, no sales record, no witness who ever saw him with the weapon, no one who can say he ever owned it. Schwartzbach uses every opportunity on cross-examination to hammer this point. He asks each expert in turn whether any of their findings link the murder weapon to Robert Blake. And each expert, professionally and honestly, has to say no. The prosecution also presents evidence about gunshot residue. Small amounts of gunshot residue are detected on Blake's hands and clothing from that night. This could be evidence he fired the weapon, or it could be consistent with his own story. He was carrying his legal handgun. He had been at a restaurant. He had handled ammunition. Gunshot residue can transfer from many sources. Schwartzbach's cross-examination establishes that the residue findings are inconclusive. They are consistent with Blake firing the murder weapon. They are also consistent with him not firing it. The prosecution presents the timeline. They call witnesses from Vitello's. They establish that Blake was in the restaurant for some period of time during the missing window, but they cannot establish with precision when he left. They cannot establish that he was out of sight of witnesses for long enough to walk to the car, shoot his wife, dispose of the weapon in a dumpster, and return to his role as the grieving husband. The timeline is tight, possibly too tight. Schwartzbach argues it is impossible. The prosecution argues it is barely possible. The jury has to decide. And throughout all of this, there is Robert Blake himself, sitting at the defense table, an old man by now, 71 years old during the trial, white-haired, thin, weathered. He wears simple suits. He watches the proceedings with an expression that the courtroom reporters describe variously as grief, fear, anger, and sometimes blankness. He cries at times. He shakes his head at times. He mutters to his attorneys. And then, in a move that stuns legal observers, Robert Blake takes the stand in his own defense. This is a decision Schwartzbach has clearly made after long deliberation. Most criminal defense attorneys do not put their clients on the stand. The risk is enormous. Cross-examination can destroy a defendant. But Blake is an actor, a trained performer, a man who has spent 70 years of his life on camera, and he wants to tell his story. Blake testifies for days. He describes his life, his career, his marriages, his children. He describes meeting Bonnie. He describes the pregnancy. He describes his decision to marry her for the sake of his daughter. He describes his fears about Bonnie, his worries about her fraud activities, his concern for Rose. And he describes the night of May 4th, 2001, in detail. The restaurant, the dinner, the walk to the car, the forgotten gun, the walk back, the return, finding Bonnie, the run to Stanik's house. He weeps on the stand. He tells the jury, "I loved that woman. She was the mother of my daughter. I did not do this. I could never do this." On cross-examination, Samuels is aggressive. She tries to catch Blake in inconsistencies. She tries to pin him down on the timeline. She tries to get him to admit something, anything, that would confirm the prosecution's theory. Blake holds, sometimes angrily, sometimes tearfully, sometimes with long pauses. But he does not break. He does not contradict his core story. He maintains, through hours of hostile questioning, that he did not kill his wife and did not arrange for anyone else to do it. Whether you believe him or not, whether the jury believes him or not, is the central question of the trial. And it is the central question of this entire case. Final arguments are delivered in early March 2005. Samuels argues passionately that Blake is guilty. She lays out the overwhelming motive. She reminds the jury of the stuntmen's testimony. She emphasizes the missing minute. She argues that the combination of all these factors, even without physical evidence, points to only one conclusion. Schwartzbach argues with equal force that the prosecution has not met its burden. He walks the jury through each piece of evidence. He reminds them of the reasonable doubt standard. He points out that the stuntmen are not credible, that the physical evidence does not connect to Blake, that the timeline does not work, that the prosecution has built a case on speculation and on the assumption that because Blake had motive, he must have acted on it. The jury deliberates for 9 days. On March 16, 2005, the verdict is delivered. The foreman stands. The clerk reads, "Not guilty on the count of first-degree murder. Not guilty on one count of solicitation of murder, the Duffy Hambleton count. Hung on the second solicitation count, the Gary McClarty count," which the prosecutor later declines to retry. Robert Blake collapses at the defense table. He weeps openly. His daughters are in the courtroom. Schwartzbach is professionally composed but visibly relieved. The prosecution team sits in silence. Outside the courthouse, the reactions are immediate and divided. Some legal commentators argue this is a just verdict. The prosecution did not have the physical evidence. The stuntmen were not credible. Reasonable doubt existed. The jury did its job. Others are stunned. Bonnie's family, her sister Marjorie Bakley, her brother Joey Bakley, stand on the courthouse steps and speak to reporters. They are devastated. They believe Blake did it. They tell the cameras they will not give up. They tell the cameras they will find justice in another court if they have to. And that other court is already being prepared. Because the American legal system allows something that surprises many people. A person can be acquitted in a criminal trial and still face a civil lawsuit for the same act. The most famous example of this is the O.J. Simpson case, in which Simpson was acquitted of murder in 1995 and then found liable for wrongful death in a civil suit in 1997, ordered to pay $33 million to the families of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson. The difference between the two proceedings is the burden of proof. In a criminal trial, the prosecution must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the highest standard. In a civil trial, the plaintiffs must prove liability by a preponderance of the evidence. That is a much lower standard. It essentially means the jury believes it is more likely than not that the defendant caused the harm. If the jury thinks there is a 51% chance the defendant did it, that is enough. Bonnie's family, specifically her 3 adult children and the child she had with Blake, file a civil wrongful death lawsuit against Robert Blake in late 2005. The attorney who takes the case is a Los Angeles civil litigator named Eric Dubin. Dubin is not a famous lawyer. He is a young attorney who takes the case on contingency, meaning he is only paid if he wins. He believes in it. He spends years preparing. The civil trial begins in October 2005 and concludes in November 2005. The dynamics are completely different from the criminal trial. Because the burden of proof is lower, Dubin does not need to prove every element beyond a reasonable doubt. He only needs to show that it is more likely than not that Blake caused his wife's death. He can use the same witnesses, the same evidence, but he is playing on a much easier field. The stuntmen testify again. Their credibility problems are still present. But in the civil context, the jury does not have to believe them completely. They only have to think it is more likely than not that they are telling the truth. The physical evidence is presented again: the missing minute, the untraceable weapon, the overwhelming motive, the pattern of Blake's statements to friends and associates about Bonnie. And Blake is called to the stand. But in the civil trial, unlike the criminal trial, he cannot invoke the Fifth Amendment without consequence. In a criminal trial, a defendant who refuses to testify cannot have that refusal used against him. In a civil trial, the jury can draw negative inferences from a refusal to testify. Blake's attorneys make strategic choices. Blake testifies briefly, but does not give the extensive emotional testimony he had given in the criminal trial. The civil jury deliberates. On November 18, 2005, just 8 months after his criminal acquittal, the civil jury returns its verdict. Robert Blake is liable for the wrongful death of his wife Bonnie Lee Bakley. Unanimous. The jury awards Bonnie's children $30 million in damages. Robert Blake has now been, in the eyes of American law, both innocent and responsible, acquitted of murder, liable for wrongful death. Same act, same facts, 2 verdicts, 2 truths. Blake cannot pay $30 million. He does not have it. He had been a successful actor, but not a wealthy one. His legal fees for the criminal trial had already drained much of what he had. By the time the civil judgment comes down, he is effectively bankrupt. In 2006, Robert Blake files for bankruptcy. The $30 million judgment is reduced on appeal to $15 million in 2008. Blake cannot pay that either. The judgment effectively follows him for the rest of his life. Bonnie's family pursues him through every available legal mechanism, but is able to collect only a small fraction of what they are owed. Blake's final years are difficult. He lives modestly. He does small acting roles, mostly in independent films that few people see. He gives occasional interviews. He maintains his innocence until the end. In some of those interviews, he is angry. In some, he is resigned. In some, he seems broken. He dies on March 9, 2023, at the age of 89, of heart disease. His daughter Rose Lenore, the child whose birth led to the marriage, had been raised for most of her life by Blake's older daughter, Delina. Rose had a complicated relationship with her father. She attended some of the trial. She gave statements to the media at various points over the years. She is now an adult, in her 20s, living a quiet life away from the spotlight. Bonnie Lee Bakley's other children, from her previous marriages and relationships, scattered over the years. Some of them gave interviews, some of them wrote books. Most of them tried to move on with lives that had been defined since their childhoods by their mother's strange and often troubled existence. Now I want to stop, and I want to walk you through something. Because we have covered the investigation, we have covered the 2 trials, we have covered the verdicts, but we have not yet really examined the single question at the center of this entire case. The question that has haunted commentators, legal scholars, journalists, and ordinary Americans for more than 20 years now. What actually happened in that missing minute? I want to lay out, as clearly as possible, what the evidence shows and what the evidence does not show. Because this is where an honest examination of the case has to live, not in the theatrics of the courtroom, not in the outrage of the family, not in the defensive emotion of Robert Blake himself, but in the cold, patient assessment of what can be known and what cannot. Here is what the evidence establishes. Robert Blake had motive. Extensive, documented, repeated motive. He told multiple people over a period of months that he despised his wife, that he felt trapped by her, that he was afraid for his daughter. This is not disputed. This is supported by testimony from many witnesses who had no stake in the outcome of the trial: friends, neighbors, business associates. Blake's own statements, captured in various interviews and informal conversations. Blake had opportunity. He was with Bonnie. He walked away from her, leaving her alone in a car on a quiet side street, late at night. He returned to find her shot. Regardless of what happened in the minutes between, he placed himself in the geographical and temporal position to either commit the act or arrange for it. Blake had means. He legally owned firearms. He was familiar with guns. He lived in a community where weapons could be acquired, and his social circle included people, specifically the stuntmen, who had extensive experience with firearms from their film work. The stuntmen testified that Blake tried to hire them to kill Bonnie. Their testimony, while it had credibility problems, was consistent with each other in its core elements. They came forward separately. They told similar stories. The details of their claims, while inconsistent on the edges, were consistent on the substance. The physical evidence did not directly connect Blake to the murder weapon. No prints, no DNA, no ownership trail. This is the single biggest gap in the prosecution's case. The Walther P38 appears in the case as a kind of forensic ghost. It kills Bonnie. It is found in a dumpster. It cannot be traced to anyone. The timeline is tight. Blake had somewhere between 5 and 20 minutes in which to either commit the act himself or meet with someone who did. The prosecution's theory that he shot Bonnie himself requires a very specific sequence of events. Walk back to the restaurant, retrieve the legal handgun from the booth, pretend to be in conversation with staff, leave the restaurant, walk back to the car, shoot his wife with a different, untraceable weapon that he had been carrying or had hidden nearby, dispose of that weapon in a dumpster, walk to Stanek's house, pound on the door, present himself as a grieving husband. This is possible. But it is also tight, very tight. The margins are thin enough that any disruption, any unexpected witness, any unplanned delay would have destroyed the entire plan. The alternative prosecution theory is that Blake hired someone, that a third party was waiting, that while Blake was in the restaurant establishing his alibi, a hired shooter approached the car, killed Bonnie, and disappeared into the Studio City night. This theory has its own problems. It requires a co-conspirator who has never been identified. It requires a trail of payment that has never been found. It requires coordination of timing, place, and weapon that could fail in a dozen ways. The defense theory is that someone else, unrelated to Blake, killed Bonnie. That her long history of fraud and manipulation had produced dozens of people with grievances against her. That one of them, tracking her to Los Angeles, to the restaurant, to the car, took the opportunity to act while her husband was away. This theory also has problems. It requires a stalker or an enemy who had the resources and the information to find Bonnie at exactly the right moment. It requires a motive strong enough to drive a person to commit a targeted killing. Every theory in this case has weaknesses. No theory is free of problems. That is why the criminal jury could not convict. That is also why the civil jury could find liability. Because the criminal jury was looking for certainty, and there was no certainty. The civil jury was looking for probability, and the probability, when you weigh all the factors, tilts in a specific direction. Here is something I want to share with you, and I want you to sit with it. In most domestic homicide cases in the United States, in the vast majority of them, when a woman is killed and the primary suspect is her husband or boyfriend, the primary suspect is, in fact, the person who did it. The statistics are overwhelming. This does not mean Robert Blake did it. Statistics do not determine individual cases, but it is context. It is the lens through which detectives, prosecutors, and juries look at cases like this. And in cases where a celebrity defendant has excellent legal counsel, the rate of acquittal in criminal trials is significantly higher than it is for ordinary defendants with public defenders. This is not a controversial statement. This is simply what the data shows. The American criminal justice system, particularly at the highest tier of celebrity defense, is capable of producing acquittals in cases where the evidence, while circumstantial, would produce convictions for defendants without resources. Robert Blake had M. Gerald Schwartzbach. He had a team of investigators. He had expert witnesses. He had 4 months of trial time. He had every resource a defendant could reasonably have. That is part of what it means to be acquitted in a celebrity criminal trial. It means the system worked the way the system is supposed to work, given adequate resources. It does not mean the defendant did not do it. I want to talk for a moment about Bonnie Lee Bakley, because in all the media coverage of this case, in all the books and documentaries and articles, Bonnie has often been treated as a kind of joke, a fraudster, a schemer, a woman who, in the language of some commentators, brought her fate on herself. This is a disgusting framing, and I want to reject it explicitly. Bonnie Lee Bakley was a human being. She was a mother. She made choices in her life that were often wrong, sometimes criminal, and frequently harmful to others. She defrauded lonely men out of money. She lied. She manipulated. She was, in many of her dealings, not a good person. None of that means she deserved what happened to her on May 4th, 2001. None of that excuses the fact that she was killed. None of that changes the basic moral truth that a 44-year-old woman was taken from her children, including a baby who would grow up without her mother because someone, somewhere, decided to end her life. The tendency to blame victims for their own deaths, especially female victims with complicated histories, is one of the ugliest features of American crime coverage. Bonnie was a difficult person. Bonnie was also a victim. Both things can be true. The second thing does not become less true because the first thing is also true. And Rose Lenore, her daughter, grew up without her. Whatever Bonnie was in her life, she was the only mother Rose ever had, and she was taken. This is why I keep circling back, in these stories, to the question of whose loss this really is. When a person dies, especially when a person is killed, the loss is not abstract. It is specific. It is the hole in the lives of the people who loved them. In Bonnie's case, it is the hole in Rose's life. It is the hole in the lives of her older children. It is the hole in the lives of her siblings, who carried grief and outrage for decades afterward. We cannot know with certainty what happened to Bonnie Lee Bakley, but we can honor the fact that what happened was real, that a person is gone, that a family was broken. Let me walk through one more aspect of this case that I think is worth your attention: the way the two verdicts line up with what happens in American law more broadly. The O.J. Simpson case established in the American public consciousness the pattern that a defendant can be acquitted criminally and found liable civilly. But what this case with Robert Blake did was solidify that pattern. It showed that the Simpson case was not an anomaly, that the gap between the two standards of proof can produce two different, legally coexisting realities. That the American legal system accepts, formally, that a person can be simultaneously not guilty and responsible. Some legal scholars argue this is a feature of the system, not a bug. That the high standard of criminal conviction protects the innocent. That the lower standard of civil liability provides recourse for victims' families. That these two functions, criminal punishment and civil restitution, are distinct, serve different purposes, and should have different standards. Other scholars argue that this creates a kind of moral incoherence. That the average citizen, looking at a case like Blake's, does not and cannot reconcile the two verdicts. That the public is left with the impression that the legal system speaks with two contradictory voices, saying both yes and no, and leaves the judgment of what actually happened to the individual observer. I do not think there is a right answer to this debate. I think both views are defensible. But I think the reality, for anyone looking at Robert Blake's life after the verdicts, is that the two systems together produced a specific outcome. He was not imprisoned. He was also not rich. He was free, but ruined. He lived the last 17 years of his life as a ghost of his former self, a man who had been acquitted of murder and who could not escape the civil judgment that said, in effect, Everyone knows what you did. Whether that outcome is just depends on whether Robert Blake killed his wife. If he did, then the two systems together produced a rough and incomplete justice, a kind of half punishment without the full weight of criminal conviction. If he did not, then the two systems together produced a profound injustice, a man whose life was destroyed by a civil judgment after he had been formally cleared by a criminal court. I do not know, with certainty, which of those descriptions is correct. Nobody does. What I can say is this: the pattern of evidence in this case, the combination of motive, opportunity, the stuntmen's testimony, the missing minute, the untraceable weapon, the geographic and temporal coincidences, is the pattern that, in my experience examining these cases, suggests a guilty party. Not conclusively, not beyond a reasonable doubt, but as a matter of probability, which is the standard the civil jury applied. The evidence leans in one direction more than the other. The criminal jury was right to acquit, given the standard they were required to apply. The civil jury was right to find liability, given the standard they were required to apply. Both juries did their jobs. Both verdicts are defensible under American law. And Robert Blake, in the final analysis, lived the outcome of both. He walked free from the criminal courthouse. He walked out of the civil courthouse as a financial ruin. He lived another 17 years with both verdicts hanging over him. He died an old man in a small home with his daughter Delina, insisting to the end that he did not kill his wife. Whether the last 17 years of his life constituted a kind of purgatory or a kind of getaway, whether he spent those years haunted by what he did, or haunted by an injustice that had destroyed him, is something only he knew. And he took that knowledge with him on March 9th, 2023. Now I want to return to a detail that I think deserves more attention than it usually gets in discussions of this case. The weapon. The Walther P-38. This is a specific choice. A gun made in Germany during the Second World War. Not a weapon you acquire casually. Not a weapon you stumble into. The P-38 is a collector's piece in modern America. There are thousands of them in private collections, but they are not bought and sold in ordinary gun stores. They come through estate sales, through specialty dealers, through private transactions between collectors. They are the kind of gun that someone specifically seeks out. The fact that the murder weapon was a P-38 tells us something. It tells us that whoever brought that weapon to Woodbridge Avenue that night had some degree of planning. They did not grab the nearest handgun. They acquired a specific weapon, one that would be harder to trace because of its age and its private collection provenance. They prepared. This detail, the nature of the weapon, was part of the prosecution's argument at trial. They argued that the choice of weapon itself was evidence of premeditation. That whoever killed Bonnie had thought about it carefully, acquired the tool, and used it with a specific intention that it could not be traced back. The defense argued that the weapon's untraceability was, if anything, evidence that whoever killed Bonnie was not Blake. That if Blake had planned this, with all his resources and connections, he could have done it in a way that did not involve an exotic collector's piece left in a dumpster. That a professional hit would have been cleaner. That a stalker with a grudge against Bonnie was more likely to use whatever weapon they had acquired for their own reasons. Both arguments have some force. Both are plausible. And the weapon remains, in the end, an unanswered piece of the puzzle. It existed. It killed Bonnie. And it told no one where it came from. There is one more thread I want to pull on. The question of whether Blake really did try to hire the stuntmen. Because the credibility problems of Duffy Hambleton and Gary McClarty are real. Their substance abuse histories are documented. Their inconsistent statements are in the record. Their financial and legal motivations to cooperate with the prosecution are clear. But here is the thing. If you step back from the details of their testimony and ask the larger question, why would two men, separately, independently, both come forward with similar stories about Blake approaching them? If both are lying, they are either coordinated, which requires them to have coordinated, or they are both independently motivated to invent the same lie, which is a coincidence that strains belief. The defense argued they were coordinating, at least implicitly, because they were part of the same professional community and talked to each other. The defense argued the stories had grown more similar over time as the two men, consciously or unconsciously, aligned their accounts. The defense argued that the financial incentives of the case, the media attention, the potential for book deals or interview payments, created a shared motivation to say what the prosecution wanted to hear. The prosecution argued that the independent nature of their coming forward, the fact that they had not been in close contact during the period they described, and the core similarity of their accounts suggested they were describing a real pattern of Blake's behavior. That men in the Hollywood stunt community are approached by actors and directors for all kinds of things, and that Blake, in his desperation about Bonnie, had reached out to the kinds of men he thought might be willing to help. This is another place where I cannot give you a definitive answer. The stuntmen's testimony is, in my view, weaker than the prosecution presented it, but stronger than the defense presented it. It is not conclusive, but it is not worthless either. There is a residue of truth in it, somewhere, even if the specifics are unreliable. The bigger pattern, though, is what matters. The pattern is that many people who knew Robert Blake in the months before Bonnie's death heard him say things that sounded at the time like serious consideration of her removal from his life. Friends, neighbors, assistants, not just the stuntmen, many people. The stuntmen's testimony, even when discounted, fits within a larger pattern of statements by Blake that, taken together, suggest a man who had been thinking, for months, about ending the problem that his wife represented. Thinking about something is not the same as doing it. Talking about something is not the same as doing it. People say terrible things in moments of anger and frustration. Most people do not act on them. The question of whether Blake crossed the line from talking to acting is, in the end, the question that the two juries had to decide. And they decided by different standards in different directions. There is a concept in criminal justice called the preponderance of evidence. It is the civil standard. It means, at its simplest, that the jury thinks it is more likely than not that the defendant did it. More than 50%, 51% is enough. If I had to apply the preponderance of evidence standard to the Robert Blake case myself, based on the public record, based on everything I have read and considered, I would tell you that I think the evidence tilts toward Blake. Not overwhelmingly, not conclusively, but more likely than not. That is a personal assessment. It is not a legal conclusion, and reasonable people can disagree. If I had to apply the beyond a reasonable doubt standard, I would tell you that the evidence does not get there. The physical evidence is too thin. The stuntmen are too compromised. The missing minute is too short and too unclear. The criminal jury's acquittal was, given the standard, a defensible verdict. This is the strange truth of the Robert Blake case. Both verdicts are defensible. Both verdicts are correct under their respective standards. The system worked, in a sense, and the system also left us, as observers, with the uncomfortable feeling that we will never really know what happened in that missing minute on Woodbridge Avenue. Let me tell you what I believe, for what it is worth, about Robert Blake as a person. I have spent many hours on this case. I have read the court transcripts. I have read the books. I have watched the interviews. I have thought carefully about the man. Robert Blake was, in the parts of his life we can verify, a complicated human being. He had a difficult childhood. He was a child performer, pushed onto screen by a family that exploited him. He had, by his own account in various interviews, experienced abuse and neglect in those early years. He became, as an adult, a man with a reputation for being volatile, difficult, and deeply emotional. He was also capable of extraordinary work in his field. His performance in Cold Blood is genuinely among the great pieces of American film acting. His work on Baretta was sharp and memorable. He was not a hack. He was a serious artist. He was also, in his later years, frightened. Frightened of age, frightened of irrelevance, frightened of the woman he had married, who he believed was exploiting him, frightened of losing his young daughter. These fears are documented in his own statements to friends and therapists, and ultimately, in his testimony at trial. Did those fears drive him to kill his wife, or to arrange her killing? I do not know. They could have. Fear is one of the most common motivators of violence in human beings. But fear does not, by itself, prove action. And the evidence, in the end, did not prove action beyond a reasonable doubt. What I can say is that Robert Blake, in the last years of his life, lived as a man under a shadow. He was cleared. He was also not cleared. He was free. He was also ruined. He gave interviews, sometimes lucid, sometimes rambling, in which he insisted on his innocence and simultaneously seemed to acknowledge that no one would ever fully believe him. He lived a long, strange afterlife. He died quietly, without fanfare, without much of an obituary in the major outlets that had covered his trial with such intensity 20 years earlier. Hollywood, as Hollywood does, had moved on. The guest lists at the industry parties did not include Robert Blake. The tribute montages at the Oscars did not include Robert Blake. When actors were asked about him, in the rare interviews where the topic came up, they tended to deflect. He was, for practical purposes, erased from the community he had been part of for most of his life. This is another kind of punishment. The social kind. It did not come with a cell or a sentence. It came with silence, with absence, with the quiet removal from the rooms where he had once been welcome. For a man whose entire identity had been built around being a working actor, being in the business, being part of Hollywood, this erasure was probably as painful as any formal punishment could have been. Whether he deserved it is, once again, a question that depends on whether he killed his wife. I want to say a final word about the missing minute, because the missing minute is, in a very specific sense, what this case is about. Not just what happened during those minutes, but what the existence of those minutes means. The missing minute is a gap in the record, a window of time during which no one saw anything. It is the kind of gap that exists in every crime, in some form. Most crimes happen in private. Most crimes are not witnessed. Most investigations must work around gaps in the record. What makes the missing minute in this case so distinctive is that it sits at the exact center of the question. It is the one space where the difference between guilt and innocence lives. And it is the one space that can never be filled. No future technology will bring back the security footage from a street that did not have cameras. No future witness will step forward 25 years after the fact and say, "I saw what happened. I saw Robert Blake pull the trigger," or "I saw a stranger approach the car." The missing minute is closed. It is sealed. It contains the truth of this case, and that truth will remain unknown. That is not a satisfying conclusion. I know. We want truth. We want resolution. We want the mystery solved, the guilty punished, the innocent protected. The human desire for narrative closure is powerful. And this case, like many true crime cases, refuses to give us that closure. What it gives us instead is a choice to hold in our minds simultaneously multiple possibilities, a choice to accept that we may never know, a choice to respect the legal process that produced two verdicts without pretending that either verdict is the final word on what actually happened. The Robert Blake case is a case about the limits of knowledge, about the limits of evidence, about the limits of the justice system, about the limits of our own ability to reconstruct from fragments the events of a single night on a quiet street in Studio City. Bonnie Lee Bakley is gone. Her daughter Rose grew up without her. Her other children lost their mother. Her siblings spent decades pursuing justice through every avenue available to them. They received a civil judgment that could not be collected. They received the knowledge that the man they believed killed their sister had died in poverty and obscurity. Whether that counts as justice is a judgment each of them had to make for themselves. Robert Blake is gone too. Whatever he knew, he took with him. He spent the last third of his life denying any involvement in his wife's death. Whether he was telling the truth, whether he was lying, whether he had convinced himself of some version of events that allowed him to live with what had happened, only he could answer. And he will not. The Walther P-38 sits, presumably, in an evidence locker somewhere. It has no story to tell. It has no prints, no DNA, no history that investigators could trace. It is just a piece of metal that killed a woman 25 years ago and then went silent. The restaurant, Vitello's, still operates on Tujunga Avenue. It is still a neighborhood Italian place. People still eat there. The booth where Blake and Bonnie had dinner that night is still in the restaurant. For a period after the trials, the booth was referred to, quietly, by locals as the Blake booth. People would ask to sit there. Eventually, the restaurant changed the layout, moved things around, and the booth lost its specific identity. Now it is just a booth in an Italian restaurant, and most of the people who sit in it do not know what happened there. That is also how these cases end. Not with a bang, not with a revelation, with the slow fading of specific places and specific objects back into the texture of ordinary life. Vitello's is a restaurant. Woodbridge Avenue is a street. The dumpster was replaced. The buildings changed. The city moved on. The missing minute was never filled. The gun was never traced. The verdict split in two. Robert Blake is gone. Bonnie Lee Bakley is gone. And the space between what we know and what we want to know is the space where this case, like so many others, continues to live. This was the story of Robert Blake, a Hollywood star whose career ended in a courtroom and whose reputation ended in a second courtroom that reached a different conclusion about the same facts. A man who lived for 17 years in the shadow of both verdicts. A man who took whatever he knew with him when he died. Our next defendant created the sound of rock and roll. He produced records that defined a generation. He lived in a castle outside of Los Angeles, a Gothic mansion built for paranoia, and he kept guns in every room. And one night in 2003, a young actress named Lana Clarkson was found in his foyer, shot once through the mouth. He said she killed herself. The jury eventually disagreed. Episode 12, Phil Spector and the Wall of Sound. I am Miles, Ghost Hunter, and I will see you in the next one.